Welcome back everyone to the Naughty Dog Reviews. Last week we went over Crash Bandicoot 2 and everything it did to improve over the first game. So if you haven't seen that, go check it out first. Anyways, this week we're going to be talking about the third and final platforming Crash Bandicoot game that was developed by Naughty Dog. Were they able to further perfect the formula they had established in the last two games, or did they instead crash and burn? Let's find out in this review of Crash Bandicoot Warped. So growing up, I mainly played two Crash Bandicoot games. Those games were Crash Bandicoot 1 and Crash Bandicoot Warped. I actually had no idea Crash 2 existed for a long time, because the third one was called Warped, so I didn't even realize it was the third game in the series. Since Crash Bandicoot 1 was punishingly difficult, especially for a kid, I spent most of my time playing Warped. Because of this, I certainly have a strong bias towards this game over the others. However, I'll still do my best to objectively explain why I think that this is the best Crash game of the trilogy. So to start off the review, let's talk about the story. So once again, the story in this game picks up right where the last left off. The Cortex Vortex has been destroyed and is sent hurtling towards Earth in a fiery blaze. So that means the story should be over, right? Wrong. Obviously, since we're playing the third game, the story can't be over yet. You really aren't very bright, are you? Anyways, the Vortex crashes into Earth, but it just so happens that it crashes right into a prison that was containing an evil mask named Uka Uka, which is essentially the inverse of Aku Aku, and is also his brother. So it turns out that Uka Uka has been the one pulling the strings all along, and Cortex was just following his command. Uka Uka is infuriated with Cortex, as he's failed him twice at this point, so to make sure it's done right this time, he brings in Entropy to help. Entropy has the power to manipulate time, so he scatters the crystals and gems all across different time periods. Now it's up to Crash to once again collect them all and defeat Cortex. While the story in this game is still pretty simple, I think it's an even further improvement from the second game. Instead of having only Cortex and Brio communicate with you, this game has each individual boss taunting you as you get closer to your fight with them. They each communicate with you once you've collected 3 crystals from their warp room, and then once more when you're about to confront them. It's a simple addition, but it makes each boss character a lot more memorable than when you just show up and beat them to death without them saying a word. For what this game is, the story is about as good as it really needs to be. It makes you intimidated by each boss while also motivating you to keep pushing through levels and collecting crystals so you can finally fight them. So the story is improved. Big deal. Nobody plays a platformer to experience a rich narrative. But don't worry, that's not all these naughty dogs have up their sleeve. The first major difference between this game and its predecessors is that it has a lot of different gameplay styles. Crash 3 offers a ton of new vehicles to control, including an airplane, a tiger, a jet ski, and a motorcycle. There's also underwater levels where Crash wears scuba gear and can get yet another vehicle to control. Unfortunately, this is the main aspect of the game that will either make it or break it for some. I understand the complaint that there are more vehicle levels than just regular platforming, but I personally welcome most of the gameplay styles. I say most, mainly because of the motorcycle levels. The motorcycle controls are really bad in this game. Trying to turn this thing is a total nightmare. The only way to properly make a turn is if you already know ahead of time that it's coming so you can prepare for it. On top of that, you also have to race 7 other people who are in cars that you will most definitely bump into at some point because they each take up half of the road. In my opinion, this is the only vehicle with bad controls. The jet ski and tiger levels specifically have always been my favorite. The jet ski controls well enough to have a whole game dedicated to it. At least it would have at the time. Obviously by now we have the technology to make more realistic wave riding games. But the tiger levels are what I have the most fun with. Playing them through normally is fun enough, however, doing the time trials are where these really shine, but more on that later. Aside from the vehicles, the regular platforming is back and even better than ever. Throughout the game, you unlock a new ability at the end of each warp room, and while some aren't as game-changing as others, they're all incorporated into the gameplay in some way. The simplest ability is the Supercharged Ground Slam. It really just lets you break reinforced crates and break regular crates from further away. Abilities like the Double Jump and Death Tornado Spin, however, add lots of new ways to approach playing through a level. Combining these two abilities can allow you to bypass certain platforming challenges if you learn to properly utilize them. There's also a Fruit Bazooka that you get from completing the 4th warp room, and while it's not as useful as the other unlocks mentioned, you can't deny how awesome it is. Beating the final warp room rewards you with the Speed Shoes. The Speed Shoes allow you to sprint, and this is mainly used for time trials, but I'm still not talking about those yet, so hold your horses, because we're almost there. Now that the abilities are out of the way, let's talk about what really matters in this game, the collectibles, because without them, why would you be playing this game? One thing Naughty Dog really wanted to emphasize with this game was you getting more bang for your buck. And anyone who's played this game will be able to tell you that it has more to do than ever before. All of the collectibles that were added in Crash 2 have made a return here. You still get a crystal on the main path of each level, a gem for breaking all of the boxes, and a gem for completing death routes. These retain all the fun that they presented in the last game, but on top of that, this game added time relics. Each level in the game offers a time relic that is required for 100% completion. There are 3 types of relics you can earn, those being Sapphire, Gold, or Platinum. Unfortunately, I don't have any Sapphire relics to show you because I'm Epic Gamer status. Sapphire relics are the only ones required to complete the game and are fairly easy to get, but you don't want to be caught having those filthy Sapphire relics on your save, you sorry excuse for a human. Anybody who has even a little bit of dignity will at least have all of the gold relics. These get quite a bit more difficult, and anyone who has them all should feel accomplished. Platinum relics, however, are reserved for only true alphas, and should you find yourself in the presence of any one of these people, I would advise that you tread lightly, as they just might be the highest form of evolution that currently exists in our world, and possibly even the universe. Anyways, the relics add a whole new layer to this game that was never there before. This game's levels were designed more around the idea of speedrunning them, especially if you utilize the double jump, death tornado spin, and the sprint shoes. I'm also glad that the Sapphire relics are all that's required to complete the game, because otherwise the true ending would be locked behind an insane challenge. However, there isn't a single reward for getting all the gold or platinum relics other than just bragging rights. It would have been nice to see at least something to show for all your hard work and perseverance, even if it were as simple as a new skin to put on Crash for future playthroughs. Even just like a mustache for completing them, I don't know. Something. At the very least, they provide an extra challenge for the most hardcore of Crash fans. One more thing the relics unlock is a secret warp room. For every 5 relics you get, you unlock a new level in this warp room. These levels are required for 100% and are pretty difficult to complete. The most difficult for me is the bonus motorcycle level that has you racing in total darkness, only seeing a few feet in front of your bike. You're also racing UFOs that provide a bit of light, but it's still really challenging. Before I get into the last few topics I wanted to discuss, let's talk about one thing this game doesn't do as well as the last. That way after I can go back and end the review on a high note. So in the last review, I talked about how Crash 2 had a lot of well thought out secrets to find that you needed to complete the game. Unfortunately, this game really only has 2 secrets, and the way you find them is just ridiculous. One, you find by crashing into a certain sign in one of the motorcycle levels, and the other is found by getting carried away by a specific pterodactyl in the level Dynamite. The only way anybody discovered that had to have been by accident, because the game doesn't give any indication that you should try that. While the lack of secrets is pretty disappointing, it's really my only problem with this game. And if you consider all the great things I've talked about so far, that's pretty impressive. So before I finish up, there's just a few more things I want to go over. Earlier in the review I mentioned how the boss characters in this game are far more memorable because of how much they interact with you before their fights. Well, the fights themselves are also far better than in the other 2 games. Every single boss in this game is fun to fight. You start off with Tiny Tiger, who is a great boss to start with since he's the least challenging. Then you fight Dingodile, who has you using his own attack against him in order to defeat him. Entropy is a nice midpoint boss who flips the arena every time you land a hit on him. Engine is back and better than ever, having you fight him using an aircraft. His fight also has 2 phases and is probably the hardest boss so far. Finally, we have Cortex, who is here to redeem himself after his abysmal fight in the second game. This is a great boss that's pretty challenging as well. Not only do you have to avoid Cortex's attacks, but Aku Aku and Uka Uka's as well. They are fighting in the same arena, and you have to be careful not to get caught in their crossfire. These fights are miles ahead of the rest of the series prior, and I always look forward to fighting them no matter how many times I've played this game. One more thing I'd like to discuss before we talk about the true ending is the aesthetic diversity. The time travel theme in this game opens up a lot more options for level themes. Because of that, the levels stand out more than ever. Just to name a few, there are prehistoric levels, ancient Egyptian levels, Arabian levels, and even levels where you ride a tiger on the Great Wall of China as it's being built. There are still levels that share themes, but this game does more to separate them from one another. For example, there are 2 tiger riding levels in the same location, but I still remember each one of them distinctly because one takes place in broad daylight, while the other is in the middle of the night with the glow of the moon in the background. Before I wrap this up, let's go over the game's true ending, and it's important that you pay attention to this one as it's going to lead directly into the upcoming Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time. Collecting all the crystals, gems, and relics gives you the true ending to this game, as well as the end of this trilogy. So all you have to do is fight the final boss one more time, and you'll send Cortex, Uka Uka, and Entropy into the Time Twister, which throws them back in time and converts them into babies. They sit and fight over who gets the mask, and are never seen from again, at least until October. To conclude this review, I'd like to say that considering all the things I've talked about, I believe that this is truly the best Crash game in the trilogy. Anybody is allowed to disagree, of course, and I even understand why some people prefer the second game. For me, however, this is the true Crash platforming experience. I give Crash Bandicoot Warped a 9 out of 10. I'd like to thank those of you who stuck around through the entire thing, and I'd like to let you guys know that recently I put together a Patreon page. For those of you who don't know, Patreon is a rewards-based system to help support creators and allow them to put more time into creating quality content for you to enjoy. I set a pretty realistic goal just for me to see if this is something I can really pursue and even possibly do full-time one day. I really hope that's possible because seriously, I love doing this. It's the most excited I've been about doing something for a while. The link for the page is on my channel, but I'll also put it in the description of this video. To anyone who decides to contribute, I seriously can't thank you enough for investing your hard-earned money on my channel, but I will try my hardest to put out content that makes it all worth it. Also, if I get patrons soon, this is where I'll start listing them at the end of these videos. Anyways, that's it for now. I hope to see you next week when I review Crash Team Racing. Until then, stay safe and goodbye.